3 American destroyers are sailing toward Venezuelan waters. 4,000 U.S. troops are on their way to the region. On the other side, Nicolas Maduro just announced something shocking. This isn't just another regular diplomatic standoff. We're witnessing the biggest U.S. military deployment in the region since 2020. Washington has doubled the bounty for Maduro's capture to $50 million. But Venezuela hit back in a way that's simply unbelievable. Something that even left Venezuela's direct neighbors, like giant Brazil, in absolute fear. So stick with me, because in the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly what's happening between the United States and Venezuela, and how this might be the kickoff to a conflict with global proportions. Let's get straight to the facts. Over the past 48 hours, 3 state-of-the-art U.S. Navy destroyers, USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson, started sailing toward the southern Caribbean. These aren't just any ships. The USS Gravely became famous for shooting down Houthi drones and missiles in the Red Sea. Officially, Washington says this is an anti-drug operation. But in practice, we're talking about 4,000 U.S. troops positioned just a few miles off Venezuela's coast. Caracas' response was immediate and intense. Maduro himself announced the activation of millions of militiamen, promising to arm them with heavy weapons. But here's a key detail the headlines don't mention. According to U.S. Defense Department sources, there's still no official confirmation that the ships have actually arrived in the region. Some early reports might have jumped ahead on info that's still in motion. That's common in high-tension situations. Details get mixed up between what's been planned and what's already in place. What we do know for sure is that the operation was authorized, the ships have been assigned, and Venezuela is already reacting as if they were sitting in nearby international waters. But to understand how we got here, we need to rewind back to the late 90s. The whole story between Washington and Caracas flipped when Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999. Before that, Venezuela was a traditional U.S. partner, supplying oil and keeping stable trade relations. Chavez changed the game. He adopted a hard anti-American stance, nationalized foreign companies, and cozied up to countries like Cuba, Russia, and Iran. Venezuelan oil, some of the largest reserves in the world, became a political weapon. The state oil company PDVSA was used to bankroll international alliances that directly challenged U.S. influence in the region. When Nicolas Maduro took power in 2013 after Chavez's death, the tensions didn't cool down. If anything, they got worse. Venezuela's 2018 and 2024 elections were internationally questioned, sparking a legitimacy crisis that Washington uses as justification for pressure. But there's another crucial factor that rarely gets talked about openly: drug trafficking routes. According to U.S. agencies, international crime groups use Venezuelan territory as a bridge to move Colombian and Peruvian cocaine to the U.S. and Europe. Washington claims Venezuelan government members either facilitate or even take part in these operations. That's why there's a multi-million-dollar bounty on Maduro's head. He's been formally charged with drug trafficking in U.S. courts. So back to the present, what can these destroyers actually do? Because that defines how tense this really is. The 3 ships, USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson, belong to the Arleigh Burke class, some of the most advanced in the world. The USS Gravely has recent combat experience. This very ship was in the Red Sea facing Yemen's Houthi rebels, shooting down drones and missiles with its Aegis defense system. Each of these destroyers can carry up to 96 missiles of different types, from air defense interceptors to Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of hitting targets over 1,000 kilometers away. But maybe more important are the sensors. The Aegis system lets each ship monitor air and sea space hundreds of kilometers out, sharing real-time info. That means they can detect suspicious movements long before they pose a threat. Alongside the destroyers, sources say an amphibious group is also being positioned. This includes Marines with capabilities for evacuation ops, fast landings, or rescue missions. We're not talking about an invasion force here, but more of a show of force that could be used in different ways. And just to be clear, officially, these forces are in international waters, running counter-narcotics missions. Legally, the U.S. has every right to be there. Politically, the message is way more complicated. Maduro's reaction was fast and calculated. In a nationwide speech, he announced the activation of 4.5 million militiamen, promising missiles and rifles for the working class. But what does that mean in practice? The Bolivarian National Militia has been official since 2009, and according to the Venezuelan government, counts millions of members. But military experts estimate only a fraction of those numbers represent people with actual training. Most militiamen are civilians with basic weekend training, organized in local cells for territorial defense. That doesn't mean we should dismiss the move. Politically, the mobilization shows the population of the country is under external threat, uniting the government's support base. Militarily, even poorly trained militias can complicate any ground operation if things ever reach that point. Maduro also mentioned giving these militias heavy weapons. Venezuela has bought military gear from Russia and Iran in recent years, including anti-air systems and assault rifles. Some of that gear might be going to paramilitary groups loyal to the government. There's another element making this whole situation messy, and hardly anyone's talking about it: Venezuela's territorial dispute with Guyana over the Essequibo region. This area, rich in oil and gold, has been claimed by Venezuela for decades, but is administered by Guyana. In late 2023, Maduro held a referendum on Essequibo, where Venezuelans voted in favor of annexing the region. Guyana, backed by the US and the UK, flat out rejected the result. Since then, border tension has been climbing, with increased military patrols on both sides. The U.S. naval presence in the Caribbean also serves as a show of support for Guyana, which is part of the Commonwealth and has historic ties to the UK. Washington is making it crystal clear that any Venezuelan action against Georgetown would have serious consequences. Meanwhile, other countries in the region are starting to position themselves. Brazil and Colombia, both sharing borders with Venezuela, are watching closely. Brazil's government, through Itamaraty, has pushed for diplomatic solutions and offered to mediate several times. Colombia's stance is trickier, since it also struggles with armed groups operating along its border with Venezuela. Now, let's look at where this might go, from most likely outcome to the scariest scenarios. Scenario 1. Prolonged pressure. This is the most likely. U.S. ships stay in the region for weeks or months, running patrols and counter-drug ops. Venezuela keeps up its defensive rhetoric and militia mobilization, but without concrete action. Gradually, tension fades as other global news takes the spotlight. Scenario 2. Incidents at sea. This is where real risks begin. During interdiction ops, U.S. ships might board Venezuelan or third country vessels near the maritime border. If one of these boardings ends in confrontation, or if Venezuela sees it as a violation of sovereignty, things could escalate fast. Scenario 3. Triggering Essequibo. Venezuela might use the U.S. military presence as an excuse to step up aggression on the Guyana border. If Venezuelan troops cross over or occupy disputed territory, it would force a coordinated international response. The US and UK have already made it clear they won't tolerate unilateral moves in the region. Scenario 4. Third-party involvement. Russia, China, and Iran, all Venezuela's strategic allies, could decide to show more concrete support. That could mean anything from sending military advisors to supplying advanced gear. If Russian or Chinese ships show up in the region as a sign of support, things get way more complicated. Scenario 5. Miscalculation, the most dangerous of all. An unplanned incident, like a misunderstanding during an operation, an accidental shot, or a misread of military movements, could trigger a response that spirals quickly. With thousands of soldiers and militiamen mobilized on both sides, even small slip-ups could have outsized consequences. This tension is already shaking up international markets. Oil prices have risen about 2% since the first news about the naval deployment broke. Investors always get nervous when energy-producing regions enter crisis. Venezuela holds some of the largest oil reserves in the world, but production is far below potential thanks to sanctions and infrastructure problems. Any conflict in the region could impact not just Venezuelan output, but also export routes for other Caribbean countries. Chinese and Russian companies have massive investments in Venezuela, especially in oil and mining. Billion-dollar contracts could be at risk if the situation worsens. That partly explains why Beijing and Moscow have a direct interest in avoiding escalation. For Brazil, the main impact is tied to migration. Any bigger instability in Venezuela could spark a new wave of refugees crossing the Brazilian border, putting extra pressure on the federal government in Roraima and other frontier states. But it's worth stressing that a big part of this crisis is playing out in the information sphere. Both sides are using strategic communication to shape public perception of who's the aggressor and who's just defending themselves. Washington frames its moves as fighting drug trafficking and supporting regional democracy. Caracas counters with a narrative of defending national sovereignty against American imperialism. On social media, disinformation campaigns from both camps try to sway international opinion. That's why it's key to check sources and publication dates. Old footage from other conflicts often gets recycled to look current. Videos of past military drills can be presented as fresh prep for imminent war. Here's a practical tip. Always see if the info appears across multiple reliable sources and whether there are specifics like dates, places, and names. Vague or overly emotional info is usually suspicious. Looking at the historical pattern of similar crises and the current factors, the most likely outcome is prolonged tension without direct confrontation. Both sides have more to lose than to gain from a real military clash. For the U.S., a direct intervention in Venezuela would be costly, complex, and politically risky. The Iraq and Afghanistan experiences left American public opinion skeptical about overseas military adventures. Pressure and containment ops are easier to sell. For Venezuela, taking on the world's biggest military power head-on would be suicidal. Maduro's strategy is more defensive, rally domestic support, seek international backing, and avoid provocations that could justify U.S. action. What we'll probably see in the coming days are shows of force, harsh statements, some minor incidents at sea, but also active diplomatic channels behind the scenes. Brazil, Mexico, and other regional countries are already offering to mediate. This isn't just another far-off international crisis. The fallout here could hit fuel prices, migration flows, and regional stability for years. What we're watching is a real test of the new global geopolitical balance, with the U.S. on one side and a bloc led by Russia, China, and their allies on the other. In the coming days, I'll keep tracking every move in this situation and bringing updates based on verified sources. If you want alerts on major developments, hit that notification bell. Drop your opinion in the comments. Do you think this tension will blow over, or are we watching the start of something bigger? And don't forget to share this with anyone who needs to understand what's really going down in our backyard.